are going to the second keynote speech for this afternoon, and we already see our speaker, Dr. Stephen Baker here. May I invite Stephen? Hello,
Hello.
Stephen. Hello.
Hello, Steve. Lovely to meet you.
Hello. So our second keynote speech is about the Technology Explorer, connecting older adults in social virtual reality. So Stephen, is your time to give us the second keynote speech.
Thank you very much for inviting me to speak today. I'm really passionate about social work and using technology, and so it's a real pleasure for me to be able to speak with you today. So today I'm going to be presenting some work that I completed just before the pandemic, and so we've been busy writing and completing the project after we finished collecting the data. And the project, the title of my presentation today is The Technology Explorers, Connecting Older Adults in Social Virtual Reality. So just to give you a bit of an outline of the project. So the project used participatory action research. So that form of research was really looking at how we can partner with older adults to understand their needs and to make sure that they're involved intimately with the research process and with designing the technology that we were going to use with them. And so today I'm going to speak about the 3 action research cycles that we used in the project: the ideation cycle, the design cycle, and the deployment cycle. So what is the Aging and Avatars project that we were working on? It was looking at the idea of social virtual reality and how older adults could use social virtual reality to participate in meaningful social interactions. Since the pandemic, we've all become very aware of the need to use technology to connect people, and particularly to connect older people who might be separated from family members and friends. And so part of this research was really looking at how can we use this emerging technology of social virtual reality to connect older adults together. The other aspect of the project was that because when you are embodied in social virtual reality, you have to be embodied as a digital avatar. We were interested in how older adults felt about being embodied and expressing themselves through a digital character rather than themselves. The participants in our study, we called them the Technology Explorers. They were 25 older adults, all over the age of 70 years. The only inclusion criteria for becoming involved in our project was that they had to have an interest in technology. We had groups in Melbourne, in Australia, and also in Bendigo, which is a regional city about 150 kilometres away. And our aim was to work with these groups separately and then bring them together in a social virtual world at the end of the project. So, as I said, the project went through really 3 different distinct action research cycles or phases. And the first phase was what we call the ideation phase, where we wanted to work with the older adults to help them to understand what social virtuality was and how they could get involved in the design process. So on the screen at the moment, you'll see some photos that were taken during the workshops at this stage of the project. So initially, the older adults had never seen virtual reality before, and they didn't know anything about it. So during this initial part of the project, we conducted a range of workshops with them to introduce them to different virtual reality headsets, anything from very simple technology like Google Cardboard, all the way through to more advanced virtual reality systems. And we gave them the chance to experience a lot of different applications in these headsets so that they would get a good understanding of what was possible in virtual worlds. In the bottom left-hand corner of the screen, there's also a picture. We conducted workshops where the Technology Explorers actually used open source software called Make Human to build and design their own avatars, which our design team then took away so that they would be able to embody and use those avatars at a later date. So that was sort of some of the parts of the initial stage of the project. I'm going to show you a short video now, which shows you the older adults using their avatars in some of the initial builds of our project. One of them was an immersive space where they could interact with other technology explorers as their avatar. And the other was a small social virtual world that they embodied. So you're going to hear from me and also hear from some of the technology explorers themselves about what they see as being the advantages of this technology. So I'll play that now. The Aging in Avatars project's aim is to use participatory research methods to develop technologies that help older adults who may be socially isolated to participate in social activities. To help with this aim, we've created 2 technology explorer circles who are working with us to trial ways that virtual reality technology and avatars can be used to facilitate meaningful social interactions in virtual worlds.
I think it's going to be a real necessity to be on top of some technology for healthy aging. Otherwise, I think we're going to be isolated from so much of what goes on in the world around us now. If we can work and help in the development of something that's much easier to use, then that'll be good.
I didn't know, for example, what an avatar was. I didn't know what virtual reality really was. I didn't know how you used virtual reality goggles. I think it's enormously beneficial technology.
So by the end of that part of the project, we felt as though we'd introduced the technology explorers to this technology. We'd given them a chance to see it in action, and we felt as though they were now ready to come on board as co-designers of the next phase of the project, where we would actually build a system together that they could use that would sort of respond to their needs. So let me just quickly flick across to that. So some of the key findings from this stage of the research were that the technology explorers saw potential for social virtuality to be a tool that could help alleviate social isolation. And they were especially interested in the ways that it could help older adults who are living in aged care. But they also had some problems with the technology. They felt as though it was too complex and too heavy at times. And they also wondered about how social virtuality, what the advantages of it were in relation to other types of ways of communicating, like video conferencing. Right from the beginning, the technology explorers were really interested in the idea of avatars and how they could allow them to engage in sort of new ways and present different ways for them to express themselves. But in this initial phase of the project, they were concerned about the fact that their avatars were very doll-like or mechanical and didn't allow them to be as expressive as they wanted them to be. And so we felt like this was good. These were good sort of things for us to know as we went into the next stage of the process. There are a couple of papers from this point in the project. And so if you wanted to find out more information, there's some more in that part of the project. But we now move on to the next phase of the research, which was the design phase. This is where we wanted to really work with the technology explorers to come on board and assist us to develop a social virtual reality application that they would feel would respond to their needs. And so we're going to look at that sort of stage of the project next. So we began by conducting some research focus groups with them, where we spoke about different types of applications that might encourage social interaction. And we went through a whole range of different ones, but ultimately there were 3 ideas that the technology explorers really responded to. One was really interesting. They had this idea that they thought a social rock climbing experience in social virtuality could be interesting, where they are tethered together and they have to help each other to climb up a virtual mountain. A second idea that they had was that there could be an application where they would sit in interesting virtual spaces as their avatars and play card games. And so that was another experience. And then the third idea that they came up with, which at the time we called the highway of life. And that was, the idea behind the highway of life was that we used a metaphor of a highway, a virtual highway spreading out in front of you. And that represented different stages of your life. And you could hop off this highway and engage with historical things that happened at that time. So, for example, they might stop in 1969 and see man walking on the moon for the first time, and then have interesting conversations about what they were doing at that time of their lives. So they were sort of three ideas that the technology explorers came up with for this type of application. And so we then began to refine these ideas down. We started by saying, well, we really want to concentrate on one design idea that we can see through to completion and actually make a prototype. And ultimately, the tally, when we actually asked the technology explorers what they wanted to do, they said the highway of life concept was one that they were really interested in exploring further. We also asked them whether they had any changes that they would want to make or anything that they would want to mold differently. And the feedback was really, really interesting. They basically said, we don't want to talk about historical things that have happened because we were there and we lived through those things. What we want to do is we want to find out more about the lived experience of our friends in social virtual reality. We want to hear their personal stories. And so they challenged us to adapt the application differently. And ultimately what they said is they liked the idea of being able to go back in time and speak about their experiences when they were in school, when they were young people in school. They wanted to reminisce about those experiences. So the design from that point moved on to actually working with our design team to design a social virtual world. So we held a range of workshops where the technology explorers brought in artifacts from their lives, like photographs or books or memorabilia from their school days, that we could then digitize and turn into 3D objects. And you'll see some of those in the videos that follow. We also got them to record stories about when they were young people and the things that they enjoyed doing. And we got them to perform them as avatars and turn them into holograms that we could then bring into the virtual environment so that they could hear stories from other technology explorers. And then throughout this time, we were working with the design team doing multiple iterations of a program, which came to be known as school days ultimately, which was a schoolroom environment where they would be able to be embodied in this schoolroom and share these experiences together. As part of this process, they also created their own personal avatars. So they worked with the design team to come up with 2 different avatars that they could use in this environment. The first one was what they called their realistic avatar, and it was designed to resemble them quite closely. And the second avatar was called their cartoon avatar. And this is where we asked them to express themselves and build an avatar that they felt expressed something else about them. So, for example, in this slide, we can see 2 avatars that were designed by Janice. And on the left-hand side, you can see Janice, the realistic avatar, so which is quite close to the way Janice looks. And on the right-hand side, you can see her cartoon avatar that she designed. And what she spoke to us about was, she said, this cartoon avatar, the one on the left-hand side is the way she looks, but on the one on the right-hand side is the way she feels inside. And so she felt like this avatar expressed a different side of her personality. There were a couple of papers we wrote about this design stage of the project. But basically, by the end of this time, we felt as though we had a prototype that we could test. And so that was the next phase of the project. And so I'll move on to that now. So the final phase of the project was the deployment phase. And that's where we conducted a user study. And this is where we were going to be connecting the 2 groups of older adults who up until this point had been working separately. And they were going to meet for the first time in this social virtual world so that we could understand how this application worked over distances. And so the distance between Bendigo and Melbourne in this case was around 150 kilometres. And in this next short video, you'll see some of the key aspects of the application in use. You'll see the schoolroom You'll see some of the artifacts that were able to be brought into the room and how some of the social interaction happened. And you'll also see some of the holograms that appear. So I'll play that video for you now. So I hope that video gives you a sense of what the environment looked like and some of the features of the environment. In the next little section, I want to play you some clips that were recorded through my virtual headset. So the way these groups worked is that we brought together the technology explorers in the virtual space, and I acted as kind of a facilitator. And so you'll see the view from my headset in some of these upcoming clips, and it'll give you a sense of the social interaction that happened in these virtual worlds. So we'll move on to that now. So in this first clip, you're going to see the transition where we transitioned into the virtual space. So in order to make sure that the older adults were comfortable with their avatars, we first went into a room which we called the hall. And in that hallway, they could choose their avatars. They could make sure that they had all of the ability to express themselves and that the avatars functioned the way they wanted to. And then we had a collaborative process for them to teleport into the schoolroom. And you'll see that in this clip. Fantastic. Shall we move across into the school environment?
Okay.
Right. Okay, to do that, we just have to all move our hands into the middle. There we go. And here we are.
Yeah.
Great.
Oh, hello, you're on my left.
Yep.
We've changed positions.
We have all changed
Have a
around.
bit.
Yeah.
So that gives you a sense of what the transition into the space was. In this next clip, you're going to see one of the technology explorers using some of the artifacts which we digitized to talk about his grandchildren in the virtual environment. I'll play that now. We can see. Can you tell us what's going on in this photo?
That's a photo of me when I was probably 3 years of age.
What a great photo.
Yeah, I refer to that photo. I was quite handsome then. It was a fair deterioration since. So if I,
there it is. Now we can see it. I'll pull it up for you.
Okay, this is a different photo to the one I had there. That's my grandson, one of my 8 grandsons, who is now nearly 18. A remarkable difference. I have 8 grandsons and 1 granddaughter. So the proportion isn't all that brilliant, but they're all special kids.
It's
another one.
They're both fantastic photos, but there's different. So that gives you a sense of the way that the technology explorers were able to use their avatars and the digitized artifacts to introduce topics of conversation inside the virtual world. Another aspect of the project, which was really quite interesting, was that when the older adults were going back and speaking about their school experiences, they had been young children just after the end of the Second World War. And so a lot of them had quite traumatic histories where they'd had to flee from war-torn countries, or in this case, you're going to see a clip of them talking about capital punishment and the way children were treated in schools when they were young. The audio is a little bit muffled, but I hope that you can still hear it okay. I'll play that now. Fantastic.
Did you get corporal punishment, Charles?
We did, but I was fortunate that I avoided it most of the time. In primary school, the
About being hit with a ruler on your knuckles.
oh no, we had canes, which were, you know, a metre long or
Oh, they
whatever.
were terrible.
And you got hit on the hands with those. And we had teachers who were, some teachers were really violent with them. And one of the kids had bruises all over his palm one day after he'd been administered punishment by the deputy headmaster the day before. Mm.
Yeah, we had, when I was in grade 4, Marjorie used to sit next to me. And she used to talk all the time. And we used to both get into trouble. So the teacher told us, put your hands flat on the top of the desk. And he came across with the ruler and whacked us on the knuckles. Do you think Marjorie would stop talking? Every time she got into trouble, I could. I said, yeah, that's right. But I remember that distinctly. Ruler over the knuckles, flat on the disc. It hurt.
I bet it did.
Yeah. No, we had canes which were, I don't know, a bit over a metre long, I suppose, a yard long, of various thicknesses, ranging from the thick as your thumb to thinner ones. And you had to hold your hand out, and if you pulled your hand away, you got double. And if you pulled your hand away, the teacher would try and hit you, and as he hit you and went over the top of your hand, he'd bring his cane up really fast on the other side to hit you on the knuckles of your hand that was still out.
The knuckles is the worst.
Yes.
So that, I hope, gives you a sense of some of the more personal stories that were being shared in this environment. It was something that took us a bit by surprise, was just how frequently the participants were speaking about quite personal events in this kind of social space that had been created. So in the interviews that happened just after this study, the results that we gathered basically showed that the technology explorers felt that social virtuality was a really promising social interaction platform. And interestingly, some of the shy and introverted older adults said that they felt particularly comfortable having discussions in social virtual reality. They felt as though, because they were embodied it as an avatar, they had more confidence to speak. And that was a really interesting finding. The technology explorers also thought that, and we saw a little bit of it in that last clip, that social virtuality offered kind of a space that felt like a safe space where they could discuss traumatic events. And again, that was an interesting finding that we hadn't anticipated. We took measures based on their earlier feedback to improve what we called the behavioral anthropomorphism, or the more human-like characteristics of the embodied avatars. And lots of what we tried was very successful. However, we recognized that really the technology is still sort of an emerging technology. And there's much more that needs to be done to make sure that avatars can really express human-like emotions. And the last thing which we thought was really quite interesting was that the technology explorers loved the idea of being embodied in different avatar characters for different social circumstances. So, for example, one of our technology explorers spoke about how he would love to be able to be reading a story to his grandchildren in virtual reality and to be embodied as a character from the story that he was reading. Another technology explorer, he just had his 60th wedding anniversary, and he said he would have loved to have been able to be embodied as the person he was when he got married, so that people could see how he looked back then. So there's a couple more papers that we wrote in relation to this project. I hope you enjoyed it. And with that, I'll thank you very much for your time. And I'm happy to take some questions now. I'm going to look at my chat here because I can see a couple of questions have come through. So one of the questions, while this project is very creative and meaningful, I wonder if the underprivileged groups, for example, elderly and poverty with health issues, can get access to this kind of technology. Thank you for that question. And that's a very, very good point. This project was really about looking at an emerging technology with the idea that this is going to be something that becomes much cheaper and much more mainstream over time. And so really what we were wanting to do was to ask ourselves questions about what's the potential for this technology moving forward. But absolutely, you're right that access to technology is a major issue, and not one that we address directly in this topic. I've got another question here. Thanks for your sharing. I believe the theory of reminiscence is powerful in services for the elderly. Regarding the design of the avatars and setting, I'm wondering whether the theory of inner child and inner parents of character development useful or not. It refers to the depth psychology in our hearts, not just the social history of our past. Would it be helpful to facilitate the elderlies to process their inner worlds through social virtual reality tools? Yes, thanks for that question. I think that's a really, really good point. We got the sense that one of our technology explorers actually, for her children, for her cartoon avatar, rather than designing an alternate character, she designed a character that looked like she looked when she was a 12-year-old girl. She brought in a photograph and we made that for her. And she said she'd like the idea of being able to go back and share memories looking like the character that she was. She felt like that would give her the opportunity to process and speak about those experiences in more detail, reminisce more clearly about them. And so I think there's something very powerful about the way avatars can help us to tap into some of those feelings. And see if there are more questions. Yes. How could we use the social VR tools in a life and death education program in social work? I'm not familiar with the life and death education program, so I can't really speak to that, but it sounds very interesting. And the next question was, you want to ask where the specific role for social workers to demonstrate in such a large-scale technology project operation. Oh, thank you for that question. Yes, so this was a really, really interesting project for me to become involved in. I was the only social worker on the team, but I was leading the project. I think these social virtual spaces can become quite therapeutic spaces, spaces where people feel as though they can open up and share in different ways. So I think there's actually a kind of a key role for social workers to play, to bring our skills in communication, our skills in counselling into spaces like this. And I think that there's something very powerful about bringing people together who are separated by distance in such an intimate space where you kind of feel as though you're embodied and sharing around a table, around a circle, is really quite a powerful part of this project, I felt, from a social work perspective. This is a great question. Thank you. It's great for the technology explorers to discuss their past traumatic experiences, but any follow-up if some emotions pop up? Yes, this was something that we worked with very closely during the team. So at all times, the technology explorers had a research assistant sitting with them. And so as soon as first of all, the sessions were conducted in such a way that at the end, we had a kind of sharing experience where we could share the feelings that had come up before we even left the experience. And what we then did is we wanted to transition them out of the environment. So you saw the video of them transitioning into the environment. At the end of the environment, we actually transitioned them back out into the space because we wanted to make sure that they got a sense that now they've left that sharing experience and they're now transitioning back to the real world. And then finally, the research assistants that were sitting beside them actually spoke with them and about their feelings after the sessions, and where necessary, actually gave them the opportunity to tap into further counselling and support if they needed it. But it's a really great question. I think it's something that as we look to the future and the potential of conducting social work experiences and conducting social work practice inside social virtual worlds, having support for people after the sessions is a really, really important thing for us to consider. So thank you very much for that question. And I think that's the end of the questions that I've got, but I'm happy to take any other questions that there might be out there.
Yeah. Yes, thank you, Stephen.